Oh my God, something deeply unsettling is unfolding in Jerusalem right now. Waking up in 2026 feels like opening the Bible and wondering which page of Revelation we have stepped into. Above the holy city, the sky has turned chaotic. Witnesses report massive swarms of ravens and crows circling wildly, flying in frantic, panicked patterns as if fleeing from something unseen. At the same time, giant swarms of locusts are spreading across Israel, creatures the Bible warned would appear before times of judgment and before the second coming of Jesus Christ. And all of this is happening while missiles streak across the skyline above. The Temple Mount and war continues to erupt across the region. The book of Exodus warns that God will send locusts that cover the face of the earth during the beginning of his judgment. So what does this mean for our time? Are we standing on the threshold of the greatest event in human history? Stay with me. And if you feel the urgency of these times, leave a prayer in the comments asking God for mercy and protection. The Temple Mount is considered the holiest site in Judaism and one of the most sacred places in Islam. For centuries, it has stood as a silent witness to faith, prophecy, and history. And yet now something unthinkable is happening. Missiles are cutting across the sky above the old city of Jerusalem, their fiery trails passing directly over the Temple Mount. Air raid sirens echo through the narrow stone streets as residents and pilgrims rush toward shelter. Inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, visitors were forced to remain indoors, while warning alarms sounded outside. Seeing weapons fall so close to locations that carry thousands of years of religious history is deeply unsettling. For centuries, this ground has stood at the center of faith. Now, missiles are flying above it. That is why the recent escalation has caused such deep concern. When weapons begin falling near the holiest sites on earth, the fear is no longer only about war. According to the Gospels, Jesus warned that the temple would one day be destroyed. Greater than. A prophecy many believe was fulfilled when the Romans dismantled Jerusalem in 70 AD. Today, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque stand on that historic ground sacred to millions around the world. Any damage to these sites could send shockwaves across the religious and political landscape of the entire planet. And now missiles are flying above the very ground where prophets once walked. So the question is no longer whether Jerusalem will remain at the center of history. The real question is far more serious. Are these the signs Jesus warned about thousands of years ago, or are we witnessing the early moments leading toward the return of Christ? Now it seems that the days of peace in Jerusalem are becoming fewer and fewer, right as tensions across the region continue to rise. Another unsettling event has begun to unfold. This time, not missiles in the night sky, but something far stranger arriving in the middle of the day. Dark storm clouds suddenly gathered above the city, rolling in rapidly as if pulled by an unseen force within. Minutes, the sky dimmed and the daylight over Jerusalem faded into an eerie gray glow. Witnesses say the darkness arrived far too quickly for an ordinary storm. The winds followed immediately. Greater than. They rushed through the narrow stone streets with violent force. Market tents snapped loose. Wooden shutters slammed against walls. Glass windows shattered one after another, the sharp cracks echoing through the ancient alleys. Videos filmed by residents show debris spinning through the air while people shout and run for shelter. In the background, you can hear frightened voices, cries, and the sound of doors slamming violently in the wind. Above it all, the clouds hung low and heavy, dark, swollen shapes pressing down over the city like a vast black curtain. One witness said quietly while filming the sky, "I've lived here my whole life, but I've never seen the sky look like this. It feels wrong." Others watching the storm unfold began asking the same uneasy question. Why does the sky above Jerusalem suddenly feel so strange, so unnatural? And as the wind roared through the streets, some residents whispered a thought that once seemed unthinkable. Is this the beginning of the end of the world? And the storm did not end there. The wind was still raging through the streets of Jerusalem when something even more violent began to fall from the sky. Then, without warning, hailstones began, crashing down across the city. Not the small pellets people expect during a storm. These were large, jagged chunks of ice slamming against rooftops, smashing car windshields and exploding across the pavement with a sound that echoed like the gunfire through the narrow streets. Witness videos captured the terrifying scene. You can hear the hail striking metal and stone each impact. Sharp and violent, people shouted, some crying out in fear as they ran for shelter beneath balconies and doorways. Above them, the clouds churned like something alive. Dark, swollen masses rolled across the sky, hanging so low it felt as if the heavens themselves were pressing down upon the city. The thunder did not sound like ordinary thunder. It cracked across the sky in deep, violent bursts, shaking the air as lightning split the clouds again and again in several of the videos. Something even more unsettling can be seen. Through the storm, faint trails of missile smoke still lingered in the background, thin gray lines stretching across the sky while the hail continued to fall. The last time this happened, we already saw that there was a massive conflict taking place. But right now, the situation has escalated to a whole new level. And once again, we are seeing that ominous sign, something that has already been mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, as well as in the prophecies of Romans, Daniel, and Revelation. All of these writings describe that a great hailstorm will occur as a sign of the great calamity before that day. Are these storms simply part of nature, or could they be the echo of a warning written long ago, now beginning to unfold before our eyes? In the days that followed, the violent winds and falling hail, something even stranger began to emerge from the silence left behind. Reports started spreading across the city that cracks were appearing on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. At first they seemed small, thin lines running across the ancient stone paths and dusty hillsides, but engineers who inspected the area say the ground in several places appears to be slowly shifting, as if the earth beneath Jerusalem is quietly adjusting itself after the storm. Geologists were quick to point out an important detail. The Mount of Olives sits directly above a fault line connected to the Great Rift Valley, one of the largest geological systems on the planet. This massive fracture stretches thousands of kilometers from Lebanon all the way down to the Red Sea. Greater than, and according to scientists, Jerusalem may already be overdue for a powerful earthquake. The small fractures appearing on the slopes today may simply be the earliest signs of pressure building deep beneath the surface. From a scientific perspective, this is geology, but for many people watching events unfold in Jerusalem, the meaning feels far heavier, because the Bible contains a prophecy that speaks directly about this mountain. In Zechariah 14:4, it says that when the Lord returns, the Mount of Olives will split in two, forming a vast valley from east to west. For centuries, those words were read as a distant prophecy, but now, with cracks appearing in the very ground where that prophecy was spoken, some are beginning to wonder, are these simply natural shifts within the earth, or could they be the first quiet tremors of a moment that was written thousands of years ago, a moment when both heaven and earth will be shaken? If you feel the weight of this moment, subscribe and stay with us as we continue following what is unfolding over Jerusalem. In the days that followed, another unsettling phenomenon began to unfold across the skies above Jerusalem. Witnesses reported massive flocks of birds suddenly filling the air, dark shapes swirling across the horizon in chaotic, restless patterns. Ravens and crows circled above the city in thick clusters, moving erratically as if something invisible had disturbed their ancient instincts. Videos shared online show the sky over Jerusalem turning black with wings. The birds did not fly in the calm formations people normally see. Instead, they moved in frantic spirals, scattering and regrouping again and again. Some residents said the sight felt deeply unsettling. One witness filming from a rooftop whispered nervously, "The birds never behave like this. Something has frightened them." At the very same time, another phenomenon was spreading across the region. Vast swarms of locusts have begun appearing across parts of the Middle East. These insects move like living storms. When a swarm forms, it can stretch for kilometers across the land, devouring crops and vegetation with astonishing speed. Experts from the Food and Agriculture Organization warned that under the right conditions, a single swarm can multiply hundreds of times larger. Drivers have reported highways suddenly becoming coated with millions of insects, turning the road into a moving, churning mass of wings and legs. For scientists, these events can be explained by shifting weather patterns. But for many watching these scenes unfold in the very land described throughout the Bible, the images feel eerily familiar. In Exodus chapter 10, locusts were sent to cover the land during a time of judgment. And in Revelation 9, strange locust-like creatures are described rising from the abyss during the final tribulations. For centuries, these passages were read as ancient prophecy. But now, as the skies over Israel fill with restless birds and the land trembles under swarms of insects, some people are beginning to ask a troubling question. Are these simply natural events? Or could they be the echo of warnings written long ago? Signs that the final chapter of history may be drawing closer. And as the skies above Israel darkened with restless birds, and the land trembled beneath swarms of locusts, something even more unsettling began to emerge. The vibrations grew louder. Across several cities in Israel, residents started reporting strange sounds echoing through the air. Not thunder, not aircraft, something deeper, something heavier. Witnesses described deep, booming noises rolling across the sky, followed by metallic echoes that seemed to vibrate through buildings and streets. Some said the sound felt less like noise and more like pressure in the air, as if the atmosphere itself were trembling. Videos recorded by residents capture the eerie phenomenon. In the background, you can hear confused voices and distant cries, while the strange sound pulses again and again. Windows rattle. Metal doors tremble against their frames. For a moment, it feels as if the ground itself has taken a slow, uneasy breath. Authorities quickly investigated possible causes. Some suggested sonic booms, others pointed to distant military activity, but no clear explanation has been confirmed. And what unsettled many witnesses most was the strange quality of the sound itself. It was not sharp like thunder. It was low drawn out, almost like a distant horn echoing across the sky. Above the cities, the clouds remained thick and heavy, hanging motionless over the horizon. Some residents described the sky as if it were watching a dark ceiling pressing down over the land. For those familiar with biblical prophecy, the sound stirred an ancient memory. In Revelation 8:6, the scripture describes a moment when 7 angels prepare to sound their trumpets, signaling the unfolding of extraordinary events upon the earth. For centuries, these passages were read as symbols, but now as strange metallic echoes roll across the skies of Israel, many people are beginning to ask a question that once seemed unthinkable. Are these sounds merely atmospheric disturbances? Or could they be the first distant echoes of something far greater? A warning meant to awaken the world. And the disturbances did not remain confined to the skies above Israel. As the strange sounds rolled across the air and the winds continued to tear through the streets, another pattern began to emerge. This time, far beyond Jerusalem. The earth itself began to tremble. Within a single 24-hour period, global monitoring systems recorded more than 130 earthquakes across the planet. The strongest struck off the coast of Chile, reaching a magnitude of 6. But the tremors did not stop there. Seismic waves rippled along the mid-Atlantic ridge, deep beneath the ocean floor. Others shook parts of Central Asia where the ground shifted beneath remote mountain regions. Even more unsettling were the smaller tremors appearing in places where earthquakes are rarely expected. One such quake was recorded in South Carolina, a region that seldom experiences seismic activity. For scientists, these events are numbers on a monitoring screen, data points within the restless mechanics of the Earth's crust. But for many observers watching events unfold around the world, the pattern feels strangely timed. At the same moment, storms battered Jerusalem, the skies darkened. Strange sounds echoed through the air, and swarms filled the horizon. The ground beneath humanity also began to move. Across the planet, volcanoes have shown signs of renewed activity. Mud eruptions burst from the earth in unexpected places. Fault lines that once lay silent are slowly stirring again. It is almost as if the earth itself is uneasy, almost as if the planet is shifting beneath our feet. For believers familiar with biblical prophecy, the language sounds hauntingly familiar. In Luke 21:11, Jesus warned that before the final days there will be great earthquakes in various places. For centuries, those words were read as distant prophecy. Is the earth simply behaving as it always has? Or are we witnessing the first tremors of something humanity has never experienced before? And as the earth continued to tremble in distant lands, the storm over Jerusalem refused to calm. The winds were still raging through the narrow stone streets. Broken market stalls scraped against the pavement. Hailstones hard as thrown rocks continued to ricochet off rooftops and ancient walls. The sky above the holy city had grown heavy and restless, the clouds hanging low like a dark ceiling pressing down over the land. Then the lightning began. At first it came in scattered flashes, tearing briefly through the dark clouds. But within minutes the sky was exploding with violent bursts of light. Bolt after bolt ripped across the heavens, illuminating Jerusalem in blinding white flashes that turned night into a harsh, trembling daylight. Witnesses across the city began filming the storm. In the videos, you can hear the wind howling through the valleys, mixed with shouts and cries from residents rushing for cover. Thunder rolled across the hills with a deep, shaking roar that rattled windows and echoed through the ancient stone alleys. Then one strike changed everything. Near the Kidron Valley, a powerful lightning bolt crashed directly into a large tree that had stood on the hillside for decades. Witnesses say the strike hit with explosive force. The trunk split instantly down the middle. Roots were torn violently from the ground as the shockwave rippled through the soil. Pieces of wood scattered across the slope, while smoke and splinters filled the air. Nearby buildings trembled as the thunder cracked across the valley. But what unsettled many observers was that the lightning did not strike only once. Across Jerusalem, similar strikes were reported in multiple locations. Ancient trees along the hillsides were torn apart. Branches shattered. Bark exploded outward as the sky continued releasing violent flashes of light. Each strike was followed by a thunderclap so powerful it seemed to shake the hills themselves. For scientists, lightning is simply a discharge of atmospheric electricity, a natural result of unstable storm systems. But for many who witnessed the storm above Jerusalem, the experience felt different. The lightning did not seem random. It came again and again, as if the sky itself were speaking in sudden flashes. In the Bible, Psalm 29:5 describes a moment when the voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. To ancient believers, thunder and lightning were not merely weather. They were signs of divine power moving through the heavens. And now, as trees across Jerusalem are torn apart by violent lightning strikes, many people are beginning to ask a chilling question. When the sky shatters ancient trees with blinding fire, is it simply the release of natural energy? Or could the heavens themselves be sending a warning? Humanity has forgotten how to hear? the disturbances did not appear as isolated incidents. They began to overlap. In the days surrounding the storms over Jerusalem, residents noticed something increasingly difficult to ignore. The sky darkened suddenly. Rain fell in violent bursts. Lightning struck ancient hillsides again and again. Then, almost without warning, waves of oppressive heat rolled across the city. It was not just a storm. It was a sequence. Jerusalem experienced sudden rainfall that flooded narrow stone streets. In some places, observers reported water flowing through the gutters with a strange color. Darker, heavier than normal runoff after a storm. At the same time, the air turned strangely warm and thick. Even as rain clouds hovered above the city, temperatures in nearby areas climbed sharply. Residents described the atmosphere as suffocating, the kind of heat that presses down on the skin and makes breathing feel heavier. Then came the lightning. But the lightning did not strike randomly. Witnesses across the hills surrounding Jerusalem reported repeated targeted strikes, many of them hitting trees and open ground along the same ridgelines overlooking the ancient city. Each element seemed to respond at the same moment. Individually, scientists say these events can be explained. Meteorologists point to unstable weather systems forming along the eastern Mediterranean. Geologists remind us that Jerusalem sits within a region of deep tectonic tension. On their own, none of these phenomena are impossible. But together, occurring within such a short window, they form a pattern that many residents describe as deeply unsettling. It felt, some said, as if the environment itself was reacting. The rain arrived suddenly. The sky darkened unnaturally fast. The heat pressed down without warning. Lightning split the hillsides again and again. And above it all, the clouds remained heavy and watchful, like a silent ceiling over the ancient city. For centuries, the people of Jerusalem have lived under skies filled with history and prophecy. This is a place where faith traditions speak not only about wars and kingdoms, but about the behavior of the heavens themselves. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, verse 11, a warning appears among descriptions of the final days. There will be great earthquakes, famines and pestilences in various places, and fearful events, and great signs from heaven. To modern readers, those words often sound symbolic, but standing beneath a sky that flashes with unnatural lightning while heat presses down and sudden storms flood the streets, the passage begins to feel less like poetry and more like observation. Because when water, sky, and heat begin reacting together, something deeper may be unfolding. Perhaps these events are simply natural forces colliding, or perhaps they are signals, patterns forming in the elements themselves. The kind of patterns ancient writers once described as signs. And when the sky, the land, and the air begin moving at the same time, one quiet question begins to rise across Jerusalem. What story are the elements trying to tell? Across thousands of years of human history, Jerusalem has never been just another city. Empires have risen and collapsed around it. Armies have marched across its hills. Kingdoms have claimed it, lost it, and fought over it again. Yet despite centuries of destruction and rebuilding, the same ancient city remains at the center of one of the most powerful spiritual crossroads on earth. Jerusalem is the only city in the world sacred to three major religions. At the same time, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For the Jewish people, Jerusalem is the site of the ancient temple, once the spiritual heart of their faith. It is believed to be the location where the Holy of Holies once stood, the most sacred space in the entire temple complex. Many Jewish traditions also speak of a future messianic age when the temple will be restored and the city will again become the center of divine presence. For Christians, Jerusalem carries an equally profound meaning. It is the place where Jesus was crucified, where the empty tomb signaled the resurrection, and where many believers expect the final chapters of prophecy to unfold. According to the New Testament, it is also the region connected to the promised return of Christ, a moment that believers across the world have awaited for centuries. For Muslims, Jerusalem is home to the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Islam. Islamic tradition holds that this is the location associated with the Prophet Muhammad's night journey when he was believed to have ascended to heaven. Few places on earth carry such layered spiritual meaning. Within the same skyline stand sacred locations tied to 3 different faiths, each one holding centuries of prayer, belief, and history. But Jerusalem is not only a spiritual center, it is also one of the most politically sensitive places on the planet. Throughout history, global tensions have repeatedly converged around this same ancient city. Wars have erupted over its control. Diplomatic crises have formed around its borders. Decisions made in distant capitals often ripple outward toward Jerusalem, as if drawn by an invisible gravity. Many historians see this as the result of geography and politics. But in the Bible, Jerusalem is described in very different terms. In Zechariah 12:3, an ancient prophecy states, "Jerusalem will become a heavy stone for all nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves." For thousands of years, that description has puzzled scholars and believers alike. Yet when we look at the modern world with global tensions repeatedly circling back to the same city, the words feel strangely familiar. Jerusalem sits at the intersection of faith, prophecy, history, and geopolitics, a place where spiritual belief and earthly power collide. And as strange events continue unfolding across the region, storms, tremors, signs in the sky, and rising conflict, the ancient city once again finds itself under the watchful attention of the entire world. Which leads to a question that has echoed across centuries. Why does history keep circling back to the same ancient city, Jerusalem? Throughout history, the greatest turning points have rarely arrived all at once. They begin quietly, not with a single dramatic moment, but with a series of events that appear scattered. At first, a storm. In one place, a conflict in another, strange movements in the sky, subtle tremors beneath the ground. Each event on its own seems explainable, even ordinary, within the long rhythm of the natural world. But over time, something begins to change. The events start to gather. One sign follows another. Patterns begin to overlap. Storms intensify. The earth shifts. The sky behaves in ways that make people pause and look upward. At first, most people dismiss these moments as coincidence. After all, the world has always been filled with storms, wars, and earthquakes. Humanity has lived through centuries of upheaval, and history is full of moments that seemed extraordinary in their time. But every so often, the accumulation of events begins to feel different. When a conflict erupts in a place as historically charged as Jerusalem, when the skies darken suddenly over ancient cities, when lightning tears through hillsides, the earth trembles across continents, and the elements seem to move together in uneasy rhythm, people begin to notice. Individually, each of these events can be explained by science weather patterns or geopolitical tensions. But when placed side by side, the sequence begins to raise deeper questions. Not questions driven by fear, but by awareness. For many believers around the world, moments like these are not simply about danger or uncertainty. They are reminders that history sometimes moves in cycles, and that certain periods carry a weight that feels larger than everyday life. The Bible often speaks about these kinds of moments not as sudden catastrophes, but as signals events that unfold gradually, gathering like clouds before a storm. In Matthew 24:33, a simple line captures this idea. When you see all these things, know that it is near, right at the door. The verse does not claim that any single event proves the end of an age. Instead, it speaks about watchfulness, about recognizing patterns when many different signs begin appearing at the same time. Throughout history, people have tried to interpret the events unfolding around them. Some have been mistaken. Others have simply been living through moments of great change. But one truth remains constant. When storms gather, when nations tremble, and when the elements themselves seem restless, humanity is often standing at the edge of important chapters in history. Perhaps the events unfolding now will pass, as many others have, or perhaps they are part of a larger pattern still forming. Either way, moments like this invite a simple response: to slow down, to pay attention, to watch the world carefully. Because sometimes the most important shifts in history do not arrive with a single loud announcement. Thank you for watching and reflecting on these signs with us. If this message stirred something in your heart, subscribe and stay with our channel as we continue watching the unfolding events together. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe these could be signs spoken of long ago?